Mm-hmm. Here, I just sent a link to the class. Copy, paste. Oh, yeah, Studio, right. That I know that is used. The problem with this Line app is that it doesn't let you send a bunch of people together. Okay, where's the screen brightness? Okay, let's move on. The art of giving, yeah, that's today's class. We are. Yes. Okay, I'll send in this one. Okay. Okay, so today we're going to discuss charity and charity's post in the Jewish context. Of course, charity is something that is not necessarily Jewish. There's a lot of people who give donations and do a lot of acts of goodness and kindness. And nevertheless, the Jewish perspective is slightly different, or some say very different than other people's perspective uh, to the receiver, but mostly to the giver. Whether they're doing something um, that comes completely out of their uh, own heart, or is it something that they're actually commanded to do, right? So this is what we want to discuss now. Okay, I just sent the link to whoever I know. We touched on that subject matter in a previous lecture. We have 2 years ago. Yeah, we have. Yeah, we've touched upon it several times, but yeah. I've improved the 2 years ago lecture. I added some sources and some more things that we haven't discussed back then, because I think this is a topic that requires more attention. Um, so as always, we start with something quite amusing. So the story about this rich guy who goes out to tour one of his building projects. Their land development. They're developing land, they're buying land, and they're building those skyscrapers, business centers, and high-rise condominiums for apartment. And all of a sudden, one of the construction cranes falls from its place and crushes the rich guy and his personal helper that walks with him, and they both die on the spot, and they go up to heavens, and the angel that greets them sends them both directly to hell. So, so why hell? Not even. So he says, well, the rich guy is because he's so stingy. He could have provided for so many people. Instead, he takes all his money and he invests it back in real estate. And the helper is because he was actually doing all kinds of games with the rich guy's money. Eventually, because when you get up there, there's no more games. You have to face the truth, face the judgment. So the helper says, let's hold it for a second. What if I'll give you an envelope with that work? Is there something I can handle with a check? So surprisingly, the angel says that there's what to talk about. It's a joke, of course. So he says, "What do you want to give?" And he says, I'll give you $10,000. Would that be sufficient? Give me a few more years. I have a few things to take care of. And the angel says, okay. So the guy wakes up in the hospital, right? The crane crushed him, and he wakes up in the hospital, and everybody's excited. And they said, what happened? And he tells them the story. We both died, and I went up, and the angel And it says, so what about the rich guy? Where's the rich guy? He says he's trying to bargain a better price, a better deal. He's trying to cut a better deal. He's still just too stingy, Even then, he's still trying to bargain, something for that. Money is a precious thing, and money associates, uh, unfortunately, in many cases, associates with well-being, happiness, right? Success. These are measures that people use money for, and in fact, this has to do a lot with Jewish people as well, because we face it. You could call it anti-Semitism, you could call it different names, but uh, destiny had bonded Jewish people with money over the centuries. Surely the recent centuries that are recorded, Jewish people were always pretty good with money. Let's just put it this way and not give any fuel to anti-Semitism that likes to take that genre a few steps ahead. And we know of this matter. As I said, it exists in most cultures, in most societies. Donation, contribution, helping, assisting someone who is in a less good situation than I am. And the question that is self-asked is why? Why is it so? Why should I take away from money which I have gained in a rightful way and share it with someone else who is, you could say, less talented, less smart, less hardworking, someone who's unfortunate, someone who's useless. You could use all kinds of words to describe a person who sometimes might be in a social economical level lower than yourself, and say, why is it so? Why do I have to give someone? Why do I have to share? Right? The concept of sharing with regards to money. And just for that, it becomes very interesting when the Torah describes giving charity. This is in our weekly portion, right? So the Torah says like this: and you shall perform the festival of weeks, Shavuot, to the Lord your God. The donation you can afford to give, according to how the Lord your God shall bless you. And you shall rejoice in your festival, you and your son and your daughter, and your manservant, and your maidservant, and your Levite, and the stranger, and the orphan, and the widow, who are within your cities. Everyone shall gift as much as he can afford, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. You can sit here. It's okay. You can have a seat. It's just that this is, how the three holidays are brought together, and this is one of the ending part, and then it actually summarizes all the three. It's not specifically. I brought the verse because that's the quote, but it actually refers to all of them, all of the other holidays or every other opportunity. And here we can find two definitions the Torah gives. We have on one hand donate, and on the other hand gift. And which normally we could interchange the two, speaking English or even Hebrew, but you could see there's a difference between the two. It refers to sacrifices, but it also refers to being able to support those who are less. It literally means donation. And yes, you are right. The sacrifices that are brought, it's called shlamim. Shlamim is brought accordingly with whatever you have, and the people who come to Yerushalayim, they could enjoy it with the family. But it also means, literally, it means donation. If you rejoice as yourself and also your son, your daughter, your servant, Levi, that implies a gift. A gift. Those people probably do not have enough money to rejoice without your help. Correct. And it is your liability to make sure they rejoice. So that's why it's given. So the difference between donation and gift is obviously several differences. One difference is donation is usually given from my own heart. This is something I wish to do. And you say that kind of obvious. Yeah. Son, your daughter, your my servant. Right. Of course, you have perfect index. That's a part of your household. The widow. Mm-hmm. Those are people you might just see at the festival and never again in your life. Correct. And that's a further step. I don't know. I didn't want to touch that part, but there's also different discussions in the Jewish law. Even contemporary Jewish scholars are debating the question of giving charity within your own realm, within your own family. And most people say that in fact this is superior to giving. I read not too long ago a discussion that was posted online over. I don't know if you know some ultra Orthodox community, when they marry off their children, they try to give them housing, literally give them a house, an apartment, or at least put a down payment for a house. And a lot of them are actually having a hard time doing that. And one of the 12 children, right, or 15, or even 6 children, putting 6 down payments on a house, besides having a living, just a normal day-to-day, normal expenses of a family, is quite of a burden. And I was reading about one of the contemporary rabbis who said that in fact these young people who were aided by their parents are obliged to give the masot, the money, the tithe that they give, the tzedakah, back to their parents, because it has to stay in the family. So it's not like you're giving back alone; it's your tzedakah, but you're not going to support your own parents who are really having a hard time because of these promises. And again, I'm not going to go into those corners because there's different views about it. Many scholars and big rabbis determine that this is not the right thing to do, where a parent takes upon himself a very hefty financial commitment just in order to provide a house or an apartment for the young couple. But anyway, so on one hand, donation comes from a person's heart. On the other hand, and we're going to see it inside, donation can be forced. Donation could be forced by a community if there's a necessity, if there's a need to donate, to contribute towards a cause, and a person is reluctant to do that. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to agree, and we'll soon see that in fact there's coercion, and the Beit Din, the court of justice, could force a person to give a donation, which seemingly is quite weird. They force him to give a donation, whereas a gift comes. Usually, a gift comes because of something. There was always something that preceded the gift, right? As the Zohar says, if you wouldn't derive pleasure from this individual, you wouldn't think of giving them a gift. Even in normal day-to-day operation, marketing skills and all kinds of different things, marketing tactics, people buy something and they get a gift, right? You commit to this, you sign up to this magazine, and I'll give you this stupid keychain that costs less than a few pages on the magazine. But that's how people are tempted. The more silly the prize or the gift is, the better chance that people would go for it. That's kind of awkward, but you know how it is. You probably saw these stands, these booths, wherever you go to the shopping mall or to one of the stores, the big place. You always have sign up for credit cards, sign up for this, sign up for that, buy this, I'll give. So gift normally comes because the recipient deserves the gift. On the other hand, gift is always given with a smile. Whereas donation, we're going to see soon inside, could be forced, and usually when someone is forced to do something, they don't do it with a smile. So really, if we look closely into it, the fact that the Torah does give us two different words to describe what we want, it is because it depends when, it depends where. We need to use both things. So here's what the donation, usually like we said, is an expression of a good heart or is it an obligation? So here's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Everyone is obliged to contribute to charity. Even a poor man who is himself partly maintained by charity should give a portion of what he receives. If one would give less than his due, the court used to bring pressure to bear and punish him for contempt of court until he would give the amount he assessed. And if the amount assessed or the amount was, and if he persisted in his refusal, they would seize his goods to that amount in his presence. So in other words, in cases where there's a court that's involved and they're collecting funds towards, it was accustomed in those days where people were captured until money was raised from the community, and only later there were a few poskim that said that this has to stop because the goyim or the paritzim or whoever it was, they were taking advantage of it. The fact that the community would gather together to find the sum that is required, this was taken advantage of by the bad guys, and this was kind of repetitive, so they had to change the way things are done. And this has to do, of course, like we said, with the weekly portion. It also has to do when we are just starting the month of Elul. On Shabbat is going to be Rosh Chodesh, and we're starting the month of Elul. The month of Elul, we know, is a big deal with tzedakah. It is a minhag, it is a custom that on the month of Elul we give more tzedakah, more charity than what we normally give. So let's go back to where we were in the weekly portion. We're in Chumash Dvarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And it was said, actually, the whole story of Deuteronomy. And if you notice, the weekly portions in the past few weeks and also this week and the coming week are quite long. It is Moshe trying to summarize everything that went through with the people from the day he was introduced to them until he took them out of Egypt, and 40 years through the desert until literally by the threshold of entering the promised land. So it was actually said in a few weeks. This was a few weeks before Moses died. The whole story we're reviewing now was said in a few weeks. And Moses was finding time to put emphasis on things that were not emphasized before that, several mitzvot. And this week, Re'eh, and the next week, Shoftim and Ki Tetzeh, are actually full of mitzvot, are filled with mitzvot, with all kinds of commandments. Again, some were written before but not elaborated. And here's what the Torah tells us about the mitzvah we're discussing now. It is Moshe saying, Ki yeh b'cha evyon me'achad achecha. I didn't quote that verse for some reason. Lo te'ametz et levavcha. If you find a poor person, if you find someone who is literally in need, do not strengthen your heart. Do not pretend like you haven't seen it. And some people tend to go to that direction when they see someone in need, and then they just persuade themselves that he's not really in need. That's one tactic we sometimes use. We persuade ourselves that this is not what it seems. There's more to it. And the person is sitting there at the street corner and begging, but they're probably a drug addict, and they're probably going to take the money. And in some instances, it is correct, but unfortunately, we use that excuse more often than we should. So here's what Maimonides says about the mitzvah of tzedakah. Here's our weekly portion. If there will be among you a needy person from one of your brothers in one of your cities in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, and you shall not close your hand from the needy brother. You shall open your hand to him, and you shall lend him sufficient for his need, which he is lacking. And the mitzvah is you should try to provide as much as the person needs. But then the question is asked, how much? How much should a person give to charity? There's obviously a ratio. There's something that has to be written. It says, according to Torah, you have to provide him for his needs. What if he needs an open heart surgery in MIT in Boston? We're talking $250,000. Is this something that not too many people could afford from their charity money, right? So Maimonides defines it, and he says like this, in Laws of Gift, Ilchot Matnot Aniyim, it is a positive commandment to give charity to the poor among the Jewish people according to what is appropriate for the poor person, if this is within the financial capacity of the donor. As Deuteronomy states, you shall certainly open your hand to him. Anyone who sees a poor person asking and turns his eyes away from him and does not give him charity transgresses a negative commandment. As Deuteronomy states, do not harden your heart or close your hand against your brother, the poor person. So Maimonides brings it very precisely, as he always does, and he says you have to give what the person needs according to your capacity. You need to make sure this is something that you could stand with. But then again, we want to have a little more details. So Chazal, our sages, brought a mitzvah. They introduced a mitzvah called Maaser Ksafim. Maaser Ksafim. Normally, Maaser is a tithe, and that's normally what the Torah describes about the fruits or the crops in your field. You have to give a certain percentage to the Kohen, right? The Tuman Gola, and then for the Levite, and of course, 3 years you go for Maaser Ani, and 3 years this is brought to Yerushalayim to be eaten. And Maaser Ksafim was also a fixed, but that was on a later generation. And this wasn't something that our sages came up with just on their own will, but this is also based on what we have from the Torah. So Masek Safim plus Maser Ani, Masek Safim equals between different, various opinions, between 10% of your net profit, and here it is important to stress that we're talking about net profit. It's revenue, which means whatever the income minus the expenses. So if a person runs a business and they run it very well, they make some money, they need to give their charity, they need to give their tithe from the net income after you deduct the taxes, the salaries, all the other expenses, the business expenses, inventory, and only then, once you have the profit in hand, it is when you do the 10%.
Had a bad year with no income, they are not liable for this?
So for Maser Safim, out of the rule, yes, if someone has no income, then again, let's get back to what the Torah says, even a poor person who is himself supported by charity also has to give some charity. So someone who has no income, someone who has no income has more problems than just what do they give for charity. Yeah, business, right. Business sometimes has a bad year. Even when a person has a bad year in business, they still have to put food on the table. So obviously they do have some reservoirs of money. But then, yes, you are correct. A person who has no profit, if they're having a very tough time in business, they are not obliged to give charity because there is nothing to give charity from. Then again, if you look at the verse the way it is, we're trying to put numbers into it just to have, as we always do, put some kind of a system in place. But obviously, the verse says if you encounter someone who's poor, someone who needs your help, and you are able to help them, even a businessman who is not having a good time in their business, sometimes or in most cases are able to help, then they should. And this doesn't go into Masek Safim, into this mitzvah. That's beyond that. Anyway, Tosfot brings from Sifri. It says, "It is said, you shall tithe all the seed, all the seed crop that the field gives forth year by year. Not only the seed crop, but also all of your profits from trading or any other businesses you do." So Tosfot brings, they didn't have stock exchange in those days, or options, or dividends, but still we can call it ribitu pakmartia v'kol shar revachim. All the other profits, all the other sources of income are also included. You shall tithe all the seed, which means the word all includes everything, every profit. In fact, we have precedent to that. When Abraham came back from fighting against the 4 kings, and he was encountered by Malkitzedek Melech Shalem, which was Shem, of course, Shem, the son of Noah. And it says, "Vayitel lo maaser mikol," he gave him a tithe from everything, literally everything he had. And also Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, when he made the vow, you remember the story when he dreamed and the ladder and the angels going up and down. So he says, "V'kol asher titen li aser asranu lach," everything that you will give me, God, I will give you a tithe. I'll give you 10%. So we have to put. So the frame is that 10%, and we'll soon see some people say 20%. The Rebbe was holding in the higher opinion where we use 20% from the profit. And I read somewhere somebody puts an average between the two, 15%. That's also an opinion that is brought. In any event, the framework is that you have to have, know what your income is. 10% of that goes into charity on a normal basis. The second question is now, where this is supposed to go? What defines charity? What is charity? What are legitimate causes? What are not legitimate causes? What you could use the money from? So there's a distinction between the Ramah and the Alter Rebbe. The Ramah says in Shulchan Aruch, a person should not use his charity money for anything but giving it to the poor. Whereas the Alter Rebbe said the charity funds can be utilized for other mitzvot as well. So we can see that according to what the Alter Rebbe brings, is that you could use the money of charity to do other things with it, not necessarily supporting the poor. You could also give it to yeshivas, right? Yeshiva or other institutions of Torah. Obviously there's nothing that could capture the heart more than a family of poor children that has nothing to eat. Obviously that's a cause that no one or very little people could refuse to. But let's not focus only on that. Other Jewish institutions are also in need of support. It could be building a mikveh when there is no mikveh. It could be building a synagogue, donating a Torah, giving books to the synagogue, and so on, helping yeshiva. So not necessarily poor people who have nothing to eat. These are not the cases. And still, this is literally money of charity. And of course, we know that this is how most people do. So after all that, let's try to return to where we started, or whether it's voluntary or mandatory, whether this is something that I ought to do or this is something that I choose to do, right? So we say we have a system of how much to give and where to give it, but the question is, am I supposed to give it out of my own will, or this is something that I need to do? So the Rebbe takes a very interesting approach with that, and he says, when you're giving charity, you're helping no one but yourself. Because charity is the key for wealth. And he explains that, I'll read you a letter that the Rebbe wrote to someone, a beautiful letter that he wrote. And he said, when you're giving charity, you're basically helping God, so to speak, to make you rich. Because if God could see that you know how to handle money, He's going to give you more of that, because He knows that you're reliable, that you know what to do. And the Talmud says about in Ta'anit, I brought the whole thing again. I didn't want to cut it in between. I'm sorry, the text is a little small. Rabbi Yochanan found a young son of Reish Lakish. He said to the boy, recite to me a verse, right? The verse you studied today in school. The boy said to him, a tithe shall you tithe. The boy further said to Rabbi Yochanan, but what is the meaning of this phrase, the tithe you shall tithe? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, the verse means take a tithe so that you will become wealthy. The boy said to Rabbi Yochanan, from where do you derive that this is so? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, go and test it. The boy said to him, and it is permitted to test the Holy One, blessed be He. Isn't it written, you shall not test the Lord your God? Rabbi Yochanan said to the boy, Rabbi Yoshaya said as follows, it is prohibited to test God in any way, except in this case of tithe, as it states, bring the whole tithe into the storeroom that there may be food in my house, and test me now by this, said the Lord of the hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing, that there shall be more than sufficiency, which is in Hebrew it's ad l'timrud dai, until you'll say enough is enough. So Rabbi Yochanan, this is, by the way, the source. This is a verse in Malachi that is brought. So the Gemara says very, very clearly, this is a test. You can actually make a test. You make an experiment. You don't need a laboratory, and you don't need the chemistry. You just need to make that test. You could see the more you give, the more you will end up with. That's how it goes. Rabbi Yochanan says, Reish Lakish, very simple. On the other hand, I didn't bring that story. The Gemara tells us when a person does not give enough, that actually brings them down, right? The story with Nakdimon ben Gurion, and it's a long story, whatever. We'll just use the positive example. The Rebbe takes it further and says, okay, you say if you have an X amount of money, the more you give, the more you will end up with. What happens if you have no money, or you have a very limited source of money? Could you commit to more than what you have? And here the Rebbe takes a very interesting twist, and he says yes. And he says, here's a letter the Rebbe wrote to someone. He says, God Almighty has two ways. One way is first to grant someone money, and then wait to see how much they separate for charity. Another way is when one gives charity more of that, his or her capabilities, and God Almighty does not remain in debt, but rather gives back several times as much. Therefore, seeing the amount on the check you sent me, or you sent whatever, it wondered me, why are you having mercy on God? What do you care, having the check as such that God will grant you multiple times as much? So this is about someone who was donating, who was given, and he was expected to give a certain amount of money, and unfortunately he did not meet those expectations. And the Rebbe does not try to reprimand him over that. He says, there's two ways of doing things. It's God looking at you and saying, you know what? I want to give you. So don't have mercy. Don't worry, God is enough. He can provide you. Just open that opening, open that gate for God to get into you and to bring it and to give it to you. There was a story about, it took place in Farbrengen in Yutes Kislev, in the 19th of Kislev, Tafshid Yud Chet, which is 1957, and the Rebbe talked about the fact that they were building a new shchuna, they were building a new neighborhood in Kfar Chabad, and he said that we'll now do a makbit, we'll now do fundraise, and everyone should have, they were giving out blank pieces of paper, and everyone should write on the piece of paper how much they're willing to commit. So the Rebbe took the papers. By the way, this is something that, when I came to Taiwan, I was introduced to that. A very interesting, in Israel, when somebody goes to an event, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, there's like a safe, and you put envelopes with money in it, right? That's like a nice thing for the Baal HaSimcha, for the person who does, it's for the newlyweds or for the parents or for the bar mitzvah. And normally the checks and the envelopes are counted at the end of the event when everybody went home. That's when that's when they open the lock and they count the envelopes and they send thank you letters or whatever. But in Taiwan, you probably know that when you come to a wedding and you'll give money in a red envelope, of course. In fact, the money will be taken out of the envelope in front of you, will be counted and written down. So, Mr. So-and-so came and gave that much, and everybody could see, what you, that's interesting, an interesting way of doing things, right? You've been to, yeah? It is true, right? So the Rebbe was giving all these little pieces of paper somebody gave, and they brought it back to the Rebbe, and instead of taking it to the secretariat, he actually opened the pieces of paper. Everybody wrote the name and the father's name, family name, and whatever they want to give. And the Rebbe said to some people, I think you could do a little more than what you did here. He was saying in that special Farbrengen, he was saying 4 times as much. He used that term, he used those wording, pi arba, 4 times much. And he says, give 1,000, you'll get back 4,000. You like that kind of nice way. So there's this story is written in a book, Rabbi Meshiv Ma'aban. I have the book here. One of the people that were participating in this Farbrengen was an Israeli fellow, and he wasn't Lubavitcher, he was actually a Polisher, and like a Haredi guy, but not Lubavitch, but not Chabad. He happened to be there in that place, and he donated $500, which is in those days, $500 are much more than what they are today. Anyway, it was a substantial amount of money. You can ask whoever you want. And the Rebbe gave him back the note. It said something like, this is, you could do more. So he deleted it and wrote 1,000 and gave back. And the Rebbe said, I meant you should give more. Anyway, 2,000. And he got to $4,000. He got to $4,000. And, he gave back the note. And this guy, after giving back the note, started thinking in his mind, I can't do that. This is too much. I can't commit to such an amount. It's a crazy amount of money. And he started thinking, right, in his mind. So the Rebbe stopped there right away. He realized what he was thinking. And he said, don't worry, it's going to work out. And he said in the Farbrengen that whoever is not present, this was just a piece of paper, it wasn't actual money. Whoever is not present on Sunday should try and pass the money to the secretariat even before Shabbos. So this individual, with all the pressure that was there, actually wrote a check, and he wrote the date of the check for next week. What is it going to be next week? Nobody knows, but he knows that the money doesn't exist in his account now, but maybe by next week. And he gave the check, and he tells the story. This is written in, I have the book, and he tells the story. He was traveling to Israel through Belgium, right? If you remember, Sabena was the airline those days, and he went to Antwerp, and he stayed there for Shabbos. And Friday afternoon, and a friend of his, approached this guy. And he was also, it was a diamond dealer. And he showed him a diamond, and he showed him something that was rough. If you ever seen rough diamonds, you have to know how to look at it, because you know what could you get out of it. There's some Israeli development. They were making machines where you put a rough diamond in. A rough diamond doesn't look like something you even would pick up if you find on the street. but you put it in, and the machine goes from lasers and all, and tells you what you could produce out of that diamond. It's one of the very important Israeli inventions. That's Sarin is the name of the company. I remember because I studied in Belgium, and there was a big office of Sarin. We used to go every Friday to put tefillin with them. So I remember, and they had the big machine, and then when I was there, 2005, they developed the portable version. So it looked like a James Bond briefcase, and it opens up. And that little thing costs like $100,000, just that little machine. Anyway, you put rough diamond. So this guy was approached. This is 1957, before the story of Sarin and that. And he says, "What do you think?" He shows him a rough diamond, and he says, "What do you think?" And he says, "I think this is something that you could make a lot of money from." And he said, "You know what? I think you're a good guy. Why don't we go into partnership? I'll buy this diamond, because this wasn't his. He said, I'm going to buy it, and we'll polish it, and whatever comes out of it." And he said, "Okay, I just don't have any money on me, but yeah, I'm in." He says, "I'm in." And when he came to Israel, this was before Shabbos, this was Friday. He came to Israel Sunday or Monday. He reaches out to the person, and he says, "I want you to know that after I met you and I said I'm taking the stone, I found someone else, and I found someone else, and I told him I got this rough. What do you think?" And he gave me an offer. And he said, "I want you to know that over the course of the day, when you were traveling back to Israel, we made $32,000 together, me and you, and half of it is yours, $16,000. So before the check was cashed in New York for the $4,000 that he contributed, there was already $16,000 that he received from that random, so to speak, random encounter on Friday with his friend." So this is a story. The guy said, he told the story afterwards about that. Anyway, so the Rebbe's approach is that you need to actually give, not because you need to give to the cause, because you're giving yourself, because you're helping, so to speak, God to give you. And the Chafetz Chaim brought on an analogy, a very interesting parable. He says there was once a peasant, a simple guy, and a rich guy came to him. He said he wants to buy a big amount of potatoes. They're having a big event, and he wants a big amount of potatoes. And he said, "Sure, no problem. I'll come next week, and I'll bring all my produce, everything." And he said, "Okay." So they scheduled to meet in the marketplace the week after. And the farmer, brought all the potatoes he could find, because he knows it's a big order. And they used to put them in sacks. So instead of pulling out the cash, they started setting up the sacks. And the rich guy said, "On each sack, how will we count the sacks? On each sack, I'll put a little coin, a kopeka, a little 1 cent. I'll put 1 cent on each sack, and then we'll count the cents, right? Because it's hard to count sacks of potatoes. We'll count the cents, and then on each cent, I'll give you $20, $5. So they started lining up the sacks, and on each, they take one and they put 1 coin. And this peasant, thought to himself, the rich guy is so busy with the potatoes, I could steal some of the cents. I could take some of the cents, but he's such an idiot, because each cent is not a cent. It's worth $5 or $10. This is just to represent what it is. So he was so busy, he said, "I'll steal some of the cents." Who is he stealing from? He's stealing from himself, because every cent has much more value. This is just to represent what is more. So the Chafetz Chaim said, tzedakah is like, when somebody refuses to give tzedakah, they're not damaging anyone but themselves, because they're taking away from what they're supposed to deserve, what they deserve, from what they're entitled to. And in fact, this is also brought to halacha, according to what the Rebbe says, that in fact, even if a person is in a situation where they're strangled financially and they're not able to give charity, just having a commitment of giving charity in the future would help them to get out of their financial situation, their issue. And so the Rebbe says, he brought in a letter, he writes to someone, he says, in a case where a person is not able to really help for tzedakah, so he should give half of what he can, or half of what he's able to, and the other half he would remain. You write it somewhere as a debt to be later to be cashed, and this is helpful to get more help from heavenly aid. And there's there's a story with Ohev Israel. The Ohev Israel from Apta was anyway, it's an interesting story. This guy came. Ohev Israel was a rabbi in Poland in those days, and a guy came into him, one of his followers, one of his Hasidim, and said, I have to marry off my daughter, but I don't have money, I can't marry her. So the Rebbe said, I don't have money for you, but let me help you. Take a piece of parchment, and he wrote a letter to the rich guy, Mr. So-and-so, please help this individual holding this letter, give him 300 ruble to make a nice wedding for his daughter. So he went to the rich guy, the poor guy, and he can't say much, but he just gave him the letter. He handed him the letter. He opens the letter, and he says, I want you to help this individual, give him money. And he said, 300 ruble, that's a lot of money. Why do you need 300 ruble for a wedding? You don't have to have fish and chicken. You don't have to have a photographer and still and video. Those days they didn't have. So you get 100 ruble. That's enough. You don't have to take a banquet hall. You could marry your daughter in a synagogue. It's you're not it's okay. 100 ruble, based on my calculations, is more than enough for a nice, simple wedding. So, he said, okay, there's nothing, it's not like he has another choice, right? It's okay, whatever, you can give 100, give me 100. And, days passed, or weeks, or months passed, and unfortunately, our friend, the rich guy, started becoming less and less rich. And he started realizing, what had happened. He tried to review everything that went recently, and then he recollected the story where somebody came to him with a letter from the Rebbe, and he gave him less than what the Rebbe thought he should give him. So he realized exactly what happened. So he ran to the Ohev Israel, to the rabbi, and he said, I got to tell you, what's the story? You told me to give tzedakah to this guy, but I assessed that's enough. And he was okay. The wedding was probably okay. Why would I lose my wealth over that? He realized that he's losing his wealth over. So the Ohev Israel stood up and said like this, I want to tell you, 40 days before a baby is born, before a baby is even conceived, not only born, the heavenly voice announces everything of whether this person is going to be rich or is going to be poor, right? So whether they'll be tall or short, everything. We know this is brought in the Talmud in Bava Batra. And he said, before my soul came to this world, the announcement said that I'm going to be rich, super wealthy, billionaire, gazillionaire. I was meant to be a very rich man. But my soul did not want to be rich, because I know being a rich person, you have to take care of business and assets and running around. This is too much. And I didn't want the trade and the business to be a burden on me. But what was decreed was decreed. There's nothing I could do about it, right? If it was decreed that I'll be rich, it was decreed. So I had a negotiation, that's what he says, and I told God or the angel, whoever it was, that the wealth that is designated to me is going to be dispensed in a few places for other people, and every time I need money, that money will be available to me. So he says it was deposited, the wealth that was meant to be, was designated to be, was deposited, and some of it was deposited in your hand. And here we go, I'm sending you a letter that I need money, and it doesn't matter the excuse, because of this guy, because of that guy, this wedding, that wedding, I'm sending you a letter that I need money. And you decided not to honor the letter. So if you're not honoring the letter, this wealth that you own is not really yours. It was mine to begin with. If you're not honoring, so God decided to give the wealth to someone else who does honor, because that's a kind of a heavenly story. But the concept is as follows. God created, one of the questions we asked of art of giving, why are there poor people in the world? And it's a good question. Somebody asked about the Jewish people. We have it from Rashi. Rashi brings it, God loves you so much, so why are you so poor? God loves the Jewish people. We're His children. We're His chosen nation. So why are we poor? Why? Well, there's a lot of rich Jews as well, but they don't tell it in the media. There's also a lot of poor Jews. And there's much more poor Jews than rich Jews, like everywhere in the world. So why are there poor people? And in fact, it is a manifestation of God. It is the art of giving. God is a giver, and God wanted giving to be in this world. So in order for giving to be in this world, He had to change to make those differences between the giver and the recipient. If it wasn't for this, if everybody would have the same, not communism. Communism is a joke. It's not real. Everybody has the same besides the people who are on the top who have much more. It's supposed to be that everybody has the same, but it doesn't in real life, in real practice, it doesn't work, right? You'd see what happened with communism. I'm sorry, Xi Jinping. I hope he's not listening. But everyone is to have the same, then you lose the whole concept of giving. There's no such thing. Why would I give? Who should I give to? Everybody has the same. There's no giving. But God, they made those differences to begin with in order for giving to exist in this world. God is interested in kindness, in grace, in people caring for each other. And that's why He made a mechanism in the world of money transfer. Because the money goes for one way and it goes back the other way, right? What goes around comes around. What's the sentence, right? It goes back, you give and you get and you give and you get and you make more and you give more and you get more and so on and so forth. This cycle is infinite. And if this is the case, then first of all, it teaches us that giving is not voluntarily, it's mandatory. Because it's a part of the system. It has to be. It has to take place. It has to happen. If you're not going to give, somebody else will give. What will be about the person who didn't give, I don't know. But it has to happen. It has to exist. That symbiotic system has to it has to be there. So giving is a must. And then when you realize that, you understand the merit of giving. Not only is it something that, maybe I'll give, I actually want to give. I want to be a part of it. I'm interested to be a part of that. I'm interested to completing that circle that God had created. And what is it? It's money that I didn't own to begin with. When I give money from my profits to someone else, I am actually fulfilling the designation of that money. That money was meant to get to someone else, and I was privileged. To be deposited with that money. And now, here I'm doing my role, and I'm doing what I need to do. And this is, by the way, the reason why the word tzedakah in Hebrew has the word tzedek. Tzedek means just, right? Justice. That's tzedek. It is justice. In the word tzedakah, in Hebrew, the meaning of the word charity, in Hebrew it's tzedakah. You can see it. It's written on if you take the last letter, take it out. In the red pushka, you see the red charity box. You take the last letter out, hey, and you're left with tzedek. Tzedek is justice. So when you give charity, you're doing justice. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing not only for the person you give, but for yourself and for the whole world. And this is what the Torah is telling us. If there will be among you a needy person from one of your brothers in one of your cities, in your land, the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart. You shall not close your hand from the needy brother. You shall open your hand to him, and lend you shall lend him sufficient for his needs, which he is lacking. Give, you shall surely give to him. In Hebrew, it's patoach tiftach, naton titen, patoach tiftach. All these words: open, you shall open; lend, you shall lend; give, you shall give. Why is this seemingly redundant concept? Give, you shall give; open, patoach tiftach, naton titen. Right? So the idea is, right? There's a lot of commentators that are explaining that. Rashi says, here's what the Al-Sheikh brings, right? The Al-Sheikh brings, we can see that God loves poor people, so why He has made them poor to begin with? It is only in order to enable the wealthy to perform the wonderful mitzvah tzedakah. Indeed, the share of the poor people was given to the wealthy, hence their wealth. So in fact, the wealthy is only giving from the poor person's share. Thus it is said, give, you shall give. What I, God, need to give, I granted you to give. So God says, yeah, I'm interested in supporting the poor person, but I want it to be through you. I want to make you a conduit. I want you to be the one to help me, so to speak, to support. So give you shall give, or open you shall open. It means give what I was supposed to give. Give what was meant to be given to begin with. It's not you thinking, oh, I'm going to do that on my own and I want to help. Yeah, these are good thoughts. And don't get me wrong, a person is rewarded for giving charity and for doing the right thing. But they need to remember at the end of the day that they're doing justice when they give charity. They're doing the right thing, and actually that was the intention to begin with. And that's what the Rebbe also brought in the Kutei Sichot. It's brought also what is the share, what is the distinction between contributing and giving. When God Almighty blessed an individual with great wealth, one can demand by him to give. Since the wealthy understands his wealth is not solely his, it belongs to the poor and is only laid by him as a deposit. Therefore, if he is an honest man, he will not take away someone else's money, but rather give it to charity, that which it belongs to. Nevertheless, he should try to do it as a gift with joy and a happy face. So, on one hand, he's doing what is required, but on the other hand, what way he's doing it in a way of a gift. When one does not have real wealth, they might think all of what he or she has is required for their and their family own necessity. Says the Torah, contribute, even if you are not obliged to give. Give out of goodness of your heart. It is worth mentioning that first the Torah says contribute and then give, since when a person contributes more than they can afford, God Almighty blesses him or her to have wealth and give more. So first it's contributing and then it's gifting. Contributing is because you understand you're doing the right thing, but do it as a gift. Do it as somebody deserves it. In other words, when you encounter a good cause, somebody is in a need, it could be, again, poor people or an institution or any other good means. So you have the two ideas combined. On one hand, you're giving because you know this is the right thing. But on the other hand, you do it as a gift, as if they're entitled to it. As if the person that receives from you, it's not that you decide to give them, it's actually theirs. It's just deposited with you. Right? That's what he says about the Rebbe Mechabed Ashirim. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was a wealthy man himself, used to give great honor to wealthy people. So people thought, yeah, of course you give great honor to wealthy people because you want them to be next to you. And he explained, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi explained, he said, I honor this person because God honors them, because God looks at them as a partner. God deposits all that money with this individual. That means that this individual is entitled to manage all that money because he knows what to do with it. Now you could ask me what happens with wealthy people who don't give charity. What is the explanation? How does God? Well, there's free choice. There's free choice. People could do even against what they're supposed to do. And that's not the first case we encounter that. And we'll finish with another story that's also in Rabim B'Shiva Avon. There was Rabbi David Weitman, also from Antwerp, by the way, and he lives in Brazil. He's a shliach in Sao Paulo, in one of the big synagogues there. And one time he brought with him an individual from Brazil to the Rebbe. And this individual wrote a letter, and he also gave a donation to Chabad, to the institution, the central institutions of Chabad. A few weeks go by, and he calls Rabbi Weitman in Brazil, and he said, you remember we went to New York, I gave a check. The check was never cashed. Do you want to check maybe with the secretary or someone? Maybe they lost it, maybe they couldn't find it. I looked at the bank, the check was never cashed. So Rabbi Weitman calls the secretary in New York, and he was told, they went to look for it. They said, don't worry, the check is laid on the Rebbe's desk. It is over there. And he hasn't given it to us to take it to the bank yet. It's there. A few months pass by, and Rabbi Weitman meets this wealthy guy in Brazil. They live both in Brazil. He said, you know what? The check was cashed finally. The check was cashed. A few weeks later, and he has to travel to New York again. And again, he goes and he sends a letter and a check. And he's thinking to himself while he's giving the check, I wonder when would that check be cashed, because the other one took a few months too. And 2 hours later, 2 hours later, he gets a letter back and a little receipt, a slip of deposit. 2 hours after he gave the check was cashed. So the next day, he calls up Rabbi Weitman, the rich guy, and he says, I want to tell you what happened. My father, he says, crossed the street, and unfortunately, a car hit him in a high speed, and he went up in the air and landed in the other side. But surprisingly, he got up after, seeing that accident. Everybody thought this guy, he got up and, cleaned his clothes and started walking back after the car hit him. And Rabbi says, well, when did it happen? And he told them, when it happened. And they look at the time, and this was 8 o'clock in the evening in Europe. It was in Belgium. And that was exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon when he, the time that was on the deposit slip of the check. So he realized that the Rebbe knows when to deposit the check. He actually deposited the check when it was the right time for this person to be saved, or for the salvation to be granted. So in other words, it's not only the good deed that he performed, it is the timing. The timing was right. The time where the bank processed that donation, processed that check, was the time when they needed the blessing the most. It is the time when that person's father was at risk. Anyway, from all the above, we can learn that the Rebbe's very pragmatic approach to charity is that you should give, and not only you should give more than what you think you should give. You should give it on one hand as a donation, on the other hand as a gift, a donation that you must give, but as a gift that you feel there's a relationship that requires a gift. And even if it apparently seems like you're not able to, so make a commitment, and God Almighty would help you not only to match that commitment, but to get tenfold of what you wanted to give. You'll have much more than that, and you'll be able to make even a larger commitment, and that will be. So anyway, that's to do with a little bit about the portion, and also, like we said, the timing is right. The timing, we're starting the new month, the last month of the year is starting on Shabbat, right? Shabbat and Sundays was Chodesh. So this is the time when a lot of communities, a lot of places, people put more stress, more emphasis on giving. Again, causes could vary, different people, different countries, different places, but the concept is the same, where we try to make an effort to give more than what we used to give, and hopefully we'll marry to a happy and healthy and prosperous and sweet New Year. Any questions? Questions?
I just want to know the Alter Rebbe is unique in that he says that you can give more than 20% either.
Yeah.
Right? He gets against simple and general Rama.
Right.
So it can't be more than 20% because it's a matter of saving your life. Like it's like saving your.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Saving your physical life, so you certainly
Mm-hmm.
save your spiritual.
So there's no up limit as much as you could give, because according to what the Rambam or Shlomo here is saying, well, the Rambam says 20%, that's where you max it. But the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that just like a person, unfortunately, in a need to some medical situation, if they need to have an operation or treatment, they can't say, oh, this is beyond my budget. They'll do everything in their might to be healthy, to cure themselves, so much so, and even more so, with regards to spiritual health, that a person is going to need to give more tzedakah in order to refine themselves, in order to, so that they won't put a limit.
We don't realize what a critical situation is.
Yeah. Knowing what we have, and we spoke about it last week. The knowing what we have, and then understanding how to get out of that.